we have another chart on which we're going to look at the planets and all the Vargas. And again, we're going to focus more on the houses, the house cusp that the grahas are conjunct. The house cusp at the planets conjunct is the house cusp that that planet is going to be most focused on producing. So it's going to be an important house cusp. In this person's chart, we've got 3 planets all conjunct the 7th cusp. That's Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter. Starting with the Sun producing the 7th cusp, well, that's obviously the person themselves is trying to produce a relationship. You know, the Sun is always, just look at it astronomically. It's a place in the sky where there's the most light, where there's the most focus and most attention. And the Sun does the same thing in your birth chart. Whatever cusp it influences, there's just a lot of attention paid for those cusps. Then look at the Sun a little bit more, and you keep staring at it, and your eyes start watering, and you stay out in it too long, and you get burnt. So the Sun is a cruel planet, which means it's not going to a planet that ever gives us full happiness. And that's why it's a cruel, malefic planet. It can still be a producer when in good dignity, but as a cruel planet, cruel planets never give full happiness even when we have something, okay? Because there's always an element of sacrifice needs to be made. And in the Sun, when the Sun conjuncts the 7th cusp, while it will give a person relationships if it's in good dignity, there'll always be some feeling of separation where they don't feel like they're completely with the person, that there's always something holding them back or holding them apart somehow. One example, just as some examples of how this can work out is a couple that gets along great, they do everything together in life, but the guy won't have sex. He just is not into sex. He never has sex with this woman. So they never get that bonding of sex completely. So they're missing one element of completely coming together. Another couple gets along great. They're happy. They support each other in everything, except the husband's not into celebrations. To him, birthdays, Christmas are just another day. Anniversary is just another day in the life. And so those special moments where there can be a little bit more of a bonding happening between two people because they do something nice for each other, just kind of just pass. So the Sun will always create something like that when it conjuncts the 7th Bhav, or it keeps the two people not from being completely 100% together in every way. And the reason the Sun does that is because the Sun is a separating influence, as we call it. It'll separate us somehow from the things it influences. Even if we have those things, there's still some separation. The other reason is because the Sun is the planet is the king, and you know what they say, it's lonely at the top. Well, the Sun sort of is where we have to find our own self to be fully happy, okay? Because that's what the Sun wants us to do. It's a place of finding who we really are on a deeper level, on a more spiritual and soul level. The Sun, after all, is the soul. And so we tend to want to find the full expression of our soul in the bhava that the Sun is conjunct. And of course, we know we can't find the full self in anything of the world. And the bhavas are the concrete things of this world. And so the Sun always experiences some lack of finding itself in the world in whatever house it conjuncts. Okay? So that's just an idea of what the Sun does in general. So this person's identity is going to revolve around them developing and producing a relationship. So that means they're not going to be, usually when the Sun's in this conjunct the 7th cusp, a person's not really focused in life until they have a partnership. They'll easily drift. They really need a partnership to help get their life focused and stabilized and congruent and consistent. Because the Sun represents all those things, and the Sun and the 7th cusp, Sun in the 7th, conjunct the 7th cusp, comes out stronger when we have a relationship. Okay, whatever is in the 7th house, we get more of that when we have a partnership, whether that's a good or bad thing, okay? So sun in the seventh means we get more, that person will get more sun, more consistency in life, more professionalism in life, more steadfastness in life when they have a partner. And of course, this person's also got two other planets in the seventh house, which makes partnership so much more important. Mercury, of course, is seeking friendship, seeking personal understanding, communication. Jupiter is seeking joy and happiness and purpose. So this person, unless they have a woman in their life, just has none of those things. Okay, no sense of purpose, no career commitment, no goal commitment until they have a relationship. And that's very much been true for this person, and it's stronger because of two things. The Lagna Lord is Jupiter, and it's also there conjunct the seventh cusp. And the seventh Lord, the Lord of the relationship, is there as well. So relationships really dominate this person's life. Then the second planet that's in its own sign is Venus. And it's in the 8th house, which is also an intimate house of bonding and sharing with other people and other people's resources. And it's the planet of marriage and relationship. And both Mercury and Venus are the final rulers of this chart. Meaning, Moon is ruled by Mars, is ruled by Jupiter, is ruled by Mercury. Saturn's ruled by Venus, and Venus is ruled by Venus. So these are the two sort of focused places, okay? Relationships, seventh Lord and Venus. So it's a really relationship-centered chart. So here's a person who set out in life with some big goals, but they couldn't actually focus on those goals because they didn't have a woman in their life. So instead, they spent all their time where they're supposed to be working towards their goals, cruising around looking for a girlfriend. Then they finally got the girlfriend, they finally married the girl, and then they were able to really build a great, at least, and a great successful life. Okay? But they were just useless practically when they didn't have that woman in their life. And this is an extreme case because the seventh Lord is the final ruler and Venus is the final ruler. And the Lagna Lord is in the seventh along with the Sun. So both self factors in the Rashi chart are conjunct seventh cusp with the seventh Lord. So the Sun is all about this person finding his true expression in a partnership. And of course, our true expression can never be experienced on Earth because that's the expression of the Sun, the soul. So it'll always be somewhat frustrating. But just how productive can that Sun be to build a relationship, a partnership? Well, in the Rashi chart, the Sun is in an enemy sign. So we see there's difficulties to that path. The Sun is not helping him find his true self in a relationship, really not at all in the Rashi chart. The most important Varga is going to be the Saptamsha Varga, because we're talking about the seventh Bhava. In that chart, the Sun is in an enemy sign again. So again, that's kind of strike two of him really finding what he's looking for. The person he just isn't, really wants the most, that he identifies with the most. Okay, then whenever we look at the Saptamsha, we should also look at the Chaturtamsha, the fourth Varga, because it also has a strong seventh house thing. Because one of the best things we can be fortunate with is our partnership. There, the Sun is also in an enemy's Rashi, okay, and hurting that seventh Bhava cusp. So they don't feel like they're getting, they're fully lucky and fortunate with the person that they want to get. In the Navamsha chart, the Sun's in Virgo, the chart of marriage and feeling committed to the path. So in the Navamsha, that it's frustrated there as well. Okay, in the Samsha chart, doing something great, that means identifying and being with someone who's a great person, the greatest thing in their life. The Sun is in an enemy sign, hurts the seventh house. It's only in the Dwadasamsha, the ancestral and parental influences, that the Sun is in a decent place. In that place, he's in a neutral dignity. Okay, it's the only place where he's not harmful. Okay, but the Sun does not support him in being with the person he identifies with most. And so what that means is the woman he finally was with, that he ended up being with, was not the person that he wanted the most in his life. Okay? The person he wanted the most in his life, he lost in, he made that sacrifice of that person in Saturn Sun period. Okay? Under the influence of that sun. And what happened is this person fell in love with the girl who was an Asian girl, who hardly spoke English, and she was having a lot of hard times, with everything involved, medical stuff with her family, and he went and just really, really helped her out and helped her family out, and he just really, really liked this girl more than any other girl he'd known before or since. But his parents were not happy because she was Chinese and they were, fresh off the ranch, and told him what would the babies look like. They were like worried about having these half-breed kids. Her family was extremely traditional. They hardly spoke English, and they didn't want her to be with a white guy either. So he didn't mind butting heads with her family very much, okay? But he did mind butting heads with his family. So when his, mom got upset at him and her family was already upset, then he kind of let it fall apart. And then he found in that same sub-period a good off-the-farm white girl that his parents were happy with. Now, the interesting thing about that is the sun, when it's in the 7th, more importantly, when it aspects the 7th from the Upmakaraka, or the aspects the 7th from the Pada, tends to give you relationships with people from your own country. In his chart, the sun is the Upmakaraka. Irashi aspects the 7th from the Upmakaraka. In the Navamsha, the sun's always Upmakaraka. It's in Virgo, Rashi aspecting the 7th from there. The Pada of the Lagna is over here in Sagittarius. The 7th from Sagittarius, Gemini, is aspected by the sun, which indicates a person of your own race or your own country. So that sun running at that time, right after he met this girl that he really fell in love with, is going to cause him to lose this girl, simply because she's a foreigner, born in a foreign country, doesn't even have does not have citizenship in the United States, hardly speaks English. And so the sun, ruined that relationship. And it was really a painful thing for this person because they really liked this person the most. So the sun always makes you make some sacrifice. He ended up with the girl he really likes, thanks to some of the other planets we're going to look at. But he still made the sacrifice of this girl he liked the most. And I don't ever pass a time where I talk to this guy where he doesn't mention this other girl and ask if I do it. He goes, "Do you remember that girl?" And, and he'll say, "I wonder what she's doing." He's like, that's all this longing for this girl still to this day, like 30 years later. So that's kind of the sacrifice a sun in bad dignity will cause you to make when it influences your 7th cusp. It makes you, sacrifice the woman you identify most with or the man you identify with most. And you don't get that. So that's a big sense of separation. If the sun's in good dignity and good stuff, it's just the sort of thing of maybe there's just something between you and your spouse where you don't come together completely, but you're really happy with them anyway. In this case, that sun being in bad dignity in so many Vargas was drastic. The one thing they're sort of happy about is that, the sun's in neutral dignity in the Dwada assumption at least, and at least their parents were pacified and by him marrying meeting a white girl and everything. Okay, so that's not a great son. It's not really building the seventh bhava according to what his greatest, desires, and I don't like to use the word desires in the context of the sun, but everything works through our desires. When the soul has a need, it awakens a desire within us to fulfill that need. So when the soul identifies with this one person the most, it creates a desire for that person, And by the soul, I mean that person brought out their qualities the most. Okay, now what are this person's qualities? Virgo, look at that. Atmakaraka in Virgo, Lagna Lord in Virgo, Mercury, the Lord of Virgo in Virgo. And so he wanted, like I mentioned, he was of great service to this woman. He was of great service to her family. He helped them with health problems. Her and then even her brother had some health issues. He got them signed up with free insurance so they can get their ills taken care of, and he just really felt good doing that. It brought out all of his Virgoan, helpful, friendly traits, which is what's remarkable about this person. For example, he worked as a truck driver for a while, and he would, anytime anyone was stopped on the side of the road, he would help them. And he said that was what he thought was the greatest part about the job, is all the people he was able to help when their cars broke down or when they ran out of gas and things like that. So he was just, very Virgoan. And, his this one woman really brought out all those parts of him. And then he felt he was never ever to complete that service he wanted to give to her and had to make that big sacrifice. Okay? Okay, let's look at Mercury now. Mercury is the seventh lord in the seventh house. So that shows a strong partnership. Okay? And it also shows a partnership along the path of someone who's very capable and confident and skilled, which are, because it's Mercury, right? Very capable and skilled. And when a person has skills, they tend to have more confidence too. But that's a nice Mercury that's in its own sign. So there's some definitely good partnership there. And you see Mercury's business partner too, right? Well, when he got married, he worked in partnership with his wife. They drove truck together as a female wife and husband team. Then later, his wife was a acupuncturist. He's the office manager. So he does everything, and she's except treating the people. So they have a partnership. So since his marriage, he's been in business partnership because that's the nature of Mercury. And Mercury's a strong planet there. It's a dominant part of his relationship. Okay, now Jupiter is, in Virgo too, where it doesn't do really good, and the Sun in this chart's in Virgo, and Mercury's in Virgo where it's really strong. Mercury's the partner, Jupiter and the Sun are him. Which planet's stronger though? Mercury. So his wife is actually the person who helps more people, who's more Virgoan, who treats people, who's a great healer, just like you'd expect Virgo to be, okay? And he plays a lesser role in that because his planets, Jupiter and Sun, are in lower dignity compared to his wife's planet, which is Mercury. And not to mention Venus, the other planet of wife, is in its own sign too. So the more sort of, we say, successful person is his wife, and he is in partnership with her, but he's replaceable because he's the manager, where she's the actual healer and person who does the work, and people come to see her. So you see how she's sort of the more prominent person in the business partnership. Okay. All right, let's see. All right, so Mercury's good in the Rashi chart. And again, since we're looking at seventh bhava, the first place we should look is in the Saptamsha. Okay, in the Saptamsha chart, Mercury's not doing that great. It's in a neutrals Rasi. Okay, so in the Saptamsha, Mercury's not going to help or really hinder the seventh bhava, but it will reduce the level of productivity that they have. It will reduce the degree of friendship that they have. They have some, along their path of life, the big things they believe in, they are really similar as the Rashi chart indicates, with all this stuff happening, with the Mercury good there. There's a good, strong partnership there. When it comes to just lots of other things, though, they have some really different natures. Sexually, they're very different. Their sense of humor is very different. So he'll be cracking jokes when you're with them, and he'll be laughing, and she might laugh half the time because Mercury's just in a neutral sign. Luckily, Mercury's not in a bad dignity, so it doesn't hurt it, but it doesn't enrich the relationship as much as it would have otherwise. Okay? In the Navamsha, Mercury, again, is in a neutral sign, just so. So it's not really helping the sense of purpose and meaning in the partnership, in the relationship. In the Samsha chart, Mercury goes into an enemy sign. Okay? So we see that Mercury sort of, and again, Mercury in some charts is the 7th house. So the greatness possible is sort of reduced for this person. Okay, Mercury doesn't allow him to have his great success. Interesting enough, when due to his marriage, he ended up moving to a very, very small town where his wife was from, because she wanted, to live, close to her parents and stuff. So he moved to something very small, one of the towns that you might have never heard of, Whereas before, this person lived in one of the most prominent places, really the most prominent place in the state that they lived in, the most desirable area, the wealthiest city, and so on. With the university that was most cherished to go to in that state, so the place in that state, basically. And in the Samsha, Mercury is really not great, and it's the 7th lord, so we kind of see how partnership didn't help this person's greatness. Okay? Didn't help this person become a greater, more successful person in a way. And that's very true as well. He had a lot of ambitions for himself, and he'll say, I'm just my wife's office manager, He goes, I wanted to do this and this, but here I am, managing the office, So he didn't do anything great. And of course, that's been happening since Mercury Dasha is when he's been doing that. And, it's just so, okay? Compared to what his hopes had been. But the path is strong, and it works, because luckily it's really strong in the Rashi chart. Also, remember I said everything happens between the 1st and 12th Vargas in a way, okay? In the 12th Varga is where we see Mercury being really great. It's in Gemini. So, that makes, it's good in the Rashi, it's good in the Dwada Samsha, it's always going to have some good results. So if they feel good about the relationship overall, even though, he can complain about that he doesn't have this great work in life, this great role in life, but the ancestral influences are great. His family loves the woman he's married to. They all are friendly. There's no family skirmishes. There's a lot of security and sense of familiarity with the relationship and with the woman, even though there are those idiosyncrasies I talked about. But all in all, he feels like he has a valuable friend in his partnership, even though sexually and humor-wise, in lots of ways, she doesn't really understand him. Because Mercury is rock solid in the Rashi, and it's very good in the Dwada Samsha too. It's helping that 7th bhava build a tighter partnership. Okay? Without which, a lot of the sacrifices found in those other Vargas could have caused a lot of disappointment. Okay? Alright, so those are sort of the more important Vargas to consider. Mostly really the Rashi, the 4th, Saptamsha. Navamsha is always important in Dwada Samsha. Das Samsha is not as important. Um, Dracona is not that critically important in this case, but the Dracona is nice. Mercury's in a great friend sign. So this person has a great affiliation for working with friends and associates, and that makes him really effective where everyone who comes into an office, everyone that comes into his place of business, which is Mercury in the 7th house, is treated as a friend, and so there's that nice touch there. The person's extremely friendly, very good at negotiating with people to make sure everyone gets what they want due to this nice Mercury. And that's a quality, of course, that will go to improve his ability to work with his spouse and therefore have a better marriage. And because, again, it's in the 7th house, so this Mercury gives him the ability to work with associates, and that comes forth in his relationship, in his partnership. Okay? So overall, Mercury has some good stuff. It is a good, helpful planet that gives a better partnership all in all, because it's good in the Rashi and Dwada even though it is a little weak in some of the other places. It is okay that, we didn't talk about it in the 4th Varga. That's an important one too. In the 4th Varga, and the reason it's important because anytime you look at the 7th Bhava, look at the Saptamsha and the Chaturtamsha too. In that chart, Mercury is in Gemini. Okay, so that shows the fortune that comes from his wife, which means the property that he got from being with her. He moved to her old town. They now have the property of her parents. And so he's fortunate in that. And also it just makes him feel more fortunate about the relationship he's with. Even though there's that part of the sun that really identified more with this other girl, he still feels fortunate with the woman he's with, thanks to this nice Mercury in the 4th Varga. I didn't see the Mercury at first because his horns got cut off. It's not his horn, his lunar crest is not showing because where it's at on the chart. But that's Mercury, and this one's Venus over here. So, all in all, Mercury's doing a pretty good job. Then Jupiter's the other planet there. Jupiter is, debilitated in the great enemy sign in the 1st house. That's not conducive to him, having a really strong path all by himself. Okay? It's not conducive to him sort of being the leader in the relationship. Okay? Now, again, starting at the Saptamsha, fortunately, Jupiter is in Cancer. So Jupiter becomes very productive. And so things aren't as difficult as they look on the surface when you just look at Jupiter being in a great enemy sign in the Rashi. What happens to the 7th Bhava, most important, is going to be the Saptamsha. It's going to be a critical Bhava. Jupiter is also the critical planet for the Saptamsha. And Jupiter there is exalted. So this person actually has a remarkable ability for being productive in partnerships. Okay, thanks to this nice Jupiter in the Saptamsha. And so this has allowed him to prosper in his partnership and feel happy about it. It's a wonderful thing there. Okay, in the Dwadasamsha, Jupiter's, again, we should always look at the Dwadasamsha. Jupiter's in Aries, which is a great friend sign. It's also helping it there. Okay, so again, it just enriches everything about the 7th Bhava. Any type of partnerships, business, all gets more prosperous due to Jupiter being in a great friend sign in the Dwadasamsha. Partnerships, specifically romantic partnerships of two people coming together to do something different, gets really strong thanks to this Jupiter exalted. And notice this Saptamsha in general is really, really good. Jupiter's exalted. Jupiter's moon, Lord and friend moon, is in its Mula Trikona. His other friend Mars is in its Mula Trikona. Okay. The planets that are Jupiter's enemies, Mercury and Venus, are in neutral signs. So while Venus is in a friend sign, Mercury's in a neutral. So they can't really take too much out of Jupiter, especially he's exalted and got all these strong friends. And the sun is in a neutral sign, so sun is, hurting Jupiter. It's combusting Jupiter. It's agitating Jupiter. But Jupiter's strong enough to handle it. So overall, this Jupiter really makes the relationship very productive and prosperous. Um, and they produce a lot together. Since they got together, they've worked together in their business. They've had the kids they want. They have 4 kids. All of the kids are healthy. So it's been a very productive relationship. And remember what I say about a strong septumtia? Look at this. Exalted Saturn, or Saturn in its sign, Mars in Mula Tricona, Moon in Mula Tricona, Jupiter exalted. 4 planets in great dignity. 3 planets in angles in great dignity. That the 7th Lord in good dignity. Jupiter, the critical planet in the septumtia for devotedly working to be productive with another person, is exalted. Whenever you have a good septumtia, you do a lot of things with your partner that you would have never done if you hadn't been with that person. And that's very true with this person. The work they're in, they would have never got involved in if it hadn't been for them marrying this girl. This person was an engineering student who wanted to be an athlete when he met his wife, who was studying to be a nurse, and after practicing nursing for a few years, decided to get into the natural health field and became an acupuncturist. So, he's working in a field with her that he would have never have dealt with hadn't it been for his wife. He lives in an area he would have never visited if it hadn't been for his wife. So his life dramatically different as a result of his marriage, which you see by this strong septumtia, which basically means a lot of strong and beneficial influences that come to the person through their partnership. So this is really what makes the Jupiter good. It makes for a good marriage. Yes, Sun is there, and there's a part of him that doesn't fully identify with her, and had to sacrifice the girl he identified with more. But there's still some good Jupiter Mercury stuff that they have a nice relationship. Okay. Okay, that's where Jupiter is going to be really most important. Okay. We also can look at it in the Dasamsha. Jupiter is the 10th Bhava Lord in the Rashi, so and that means, again, 10th Lord in the 7th indicates a business in your profession and possibly partnership. Not necessarily partnership. Partnership, if Mercury is involved, makes more likely for business partnership. He has both. 10th Lord conjunct 7th cusp is business partnership. The Samsha we look at because Jupiter is the 10th Lord. Jupiter is in a great friend sign, so that creates a more productive and successful business. That's good, okay? So you see a lot of things, and again, this is all dasha dependent. So when Jupiter runs, we'll see them being extremely productive together, okay? So Saturn-Jupiter was an extremely productive time for them business-wise and happiness-wise and productive-wise. That's when they had their first child, no surprise, in Saturn-Jupiter, due to Jupiter ruling, being that important planet in the septumtia in exaltation. So whenever Jupiter comes along, it's really one of the most gratifying periods for them. Right now, they're in a bit of a more difficult period in some respects because, he's running Mercury Dasha. It's good in the Rashi. Suffers a little in the septumtia, so it's harder to be productive during this time. In the Navamsha, it's just neutral. It doesn't really suffer in the septumtia. It's in neutral, but it's not really building anything new. They sort of built things to where they are back in Saturn-Jupiter. And Mercury, they just sort of maintained what they built. So they've maintained the business. They haven't been more productive together since Mercury Dasha started. Okay? Because Mercury is just in a neutral sign in the septumtia. It's just not going to be as capable of producing as Saturn-Jupiter was. Now, Saturn doesn't rule any of the critical houses in the septumtia, but it's a good, strong planet. The strongest aspect Saturn makes is to the Well, it's conjunct the 7th cusp, but the strongest aspect it makes to the 7th house is 34. It makes 36 to the 4th Varga. And then the first bhava is important too. It's only influencing that a little bit. But it's influencing the critical bhavas somewhat, and it's in good dignity. So it helps produce partnership things to make them better. But Jupiter is when everything really popped into place perfectly, because Jupiter is the critical planet in the Saptamsha. It's in a good placement from Saturn. It's from the Dasha Lord Saturn. It's in the 5th from Saturn in the Rashi. It's in the 7th from Saturn in the Saptamsha. It's pretty good, okay? But Mercury's been more maintaining the marriage and the relationship. Since that period, they've been living in the same place. Whereas before that, they would shift to better places. So Mercury's just sort of maintained everything. And of course, Mercury's going on for, 3.5 more years of maintenance. However, Mercury-Jupiter happened in 2011. And that's when they had a surprise baby being born. Okay, so it's kind of surprising because they were getting there towards the end of the time you can have a kid. But Mercury always brings, bears fruit and of something new that they couldn't do without the other one. So it's always a happy moment during that time. Okay, and of course, Mercury as a planet is not doing good, but Jupiter is conjunct Mercury, so will help Mercury. So Mercury-Jupiter really helps Mercury, create a better partnership and more productivity in the partnership. Okay? So a lot of 7th house stuff, a lot of this person's story of his life is going to be wrapped up in his partnership, because there's 3 planets in the 7th house, including the Atmakaraka and the Lagna. Gemini says if basically the rule in Gemini is the house your Atmakaraka and Lagna are in are going to be a big part of your life. And that's so obvious, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's amazing Gemini has to make that rule. No other textbook gives that obvious rule, though, so it's easy to forget it. The house your Lagna Lord and Atmakaraka in are going to be huge houses for your path this lifetime. You're going to, like the cusp that those planets are conjunct will be, serious for you. Okay. So for him, it's relationships and partnerships. For me, it's, they're both in the 8th house, which is the house of the occult stuff. And, that's pretty much what I do, 8th house is vices, gaming, and occult things. Well, luckily I got the occult things, okay? Could be worse, right? So, if you see both of those in the same house, then of course that house is a double emphasis on that house, okay? All right. We have some time. We can look at some of the other planets in this person's chart. Because his chart is so relationship-centered, as a person reading this chart, you might want to start just like I did on that 7th house with all those planets that are in the 7th. But after that, start looking at one of the important karakas for the 7th house, which is the spouse, which is Venus. Okay? So Venus in the Rashi is in good dignity. Okay? So that gives him a great wife. Capable, confident, level-headed, centered wife, all in all. Okay? Now, Venus got a strong aspect from its enemy moon. Okay, let's look at Venus over here. Really strong aspect from enemy moon. Neutral Mars barely touches them. Friend Saturn barely touches them. So the moon is aspecting the Venus. Luckily, Venus is in great shape, because when the moon aspects Venus, it starves it. And it makes the person have a harder time getting out of his ego for the relationship. It makes a harder time to live for the relationship. So this person has a partial difficulty in that. But Venus, being in such stronger dignity, is going to help him do that. Okay, so he's not going to overwhelm his wife as a rule. you know, he'll have a good ability to follow the dictates of the partnership, which is good, okay? If Venus had not been in good dignity, that would have created a lot more problems, okay? In the Horo chart, luckily Venus is doing the same thing. So that means he has a very responsible spouse and he's responsible towards her. The moon will sometimes make it hard, but luckily Venus is stronger again, okay? In the Dracana, Venus is an own sign, or natural friend sign. Moon is in a natural friend sign. So they're roughly the same strong. Venus gets help from his friend Saturn, which is good. The moon is hurting Venus. Okay, so in the Dracana, Venus is not as great as he is in the Rashi chart. But he still comes out a little stronger. They're both in a friend sign. Moon is starving Venus. So that would make it 50-50 right there. But Venus is at the beginning of his sign. Moon's at his end. So the moon in the Dracana has less power than Venus. So again, he's able to work, as an associate with his wife. He's able to convey ideas in a relationship-centered way and not a self-centered, egocentric sort of way, which how the moon often do it. Okay? In the fourth Varga, it's a little different though. In the fourth Varga, Venus, the spouse, and his ability to relate is a little bit hurt by the moon, because now the moon's in Cancer, where it's really strong. Okay? So, fortune is sort of what you feel you deserve, in a way, when it comes to the moon. So, the fortune you actually get is Mercury. Okay? The fortune you believe you deserve, that you imagine you deserve, is the moon. Okay? So when you're imagining, I really should have this in my life, and you're imagining a much greater, more fortunate life, that's your moon working. Okay? The fortune you actually get is Mercury. And of course, Mercury is the sun of the moon. And so you'll get good fortune if your Mercury's good. Because from what you imagine, what you see in your life is what you deserve, that gives birth to the actual that you deserve, which is Mercury. Mercury in the Chaturtamsha up here, like we said, is really in good shape in Gemini. So he has good fortune, okay, in many ways. Venus is now in a natural friend sign, moon's in Cancer. So now the moon is actually starving Venus. So here we have an area of life where the person will not be relationship-centered enough. They'll be more egocentrically centered. Okay? The reason the moon hurts Venus in relationships is because Venus is a planet of relationship. It's you in the partnership working towards a win-win situation with your spouse. And in a relationship, there's three entities. There's your spouse, there's you, and then there's the relationship. Venus is the relationship, essentially. Okay? The moon is you. And in a man's chart, Venus is also the spouse. To have a good relationship, we have to emphasize the relationship and do things for the sake of the relationship, right? If in a relationship everything is about the moon, that means everything is about ourselves, then we can't have a good relationship. Okay? Now, in a man's chart, Venus is also the spouse though. So Venus is not only the spouse, it's also the relationship. And that kind of sucks for men, because that kind of shows that men have to focus on the relationship, which also means focusing on their spouse. Essentially, the woman is the relationship, astrologically. And a woman's chart is different. Jupiter's the husband. Venus, the moon is them, the self. And the moon is the self that wants to be loved and cherished and enjoy another person. It's the social self. And then they have Venus as the relationship. So, if the moon influences Jupiter, that helps the man. That's the good influences of the man, of the woman helping the man. But if the moon influences Venus, it makes the woman want the relationship to be about her too much. Okay? And it's not a good thing. In a man's chart, it's not good to have Venus influencing the moon influence. But, okay, what I'm saying is, then the woman will want the relationship to be about her too much, but she can still be of great benefit to her husband in other ways. Okay, because as the moon is a friend to Jupiter if it influences Jupiter. But in a man's chart, if the moon influences Venus, he wants the relationship to be more about him than the relationship. That's the problem with moon Venus, and that's why men who have moon Venus conjunctions, or women, tend to have big problems in their relationships. So when the moon is there influencing that Venus, that means the relationship is more about the man, and also the woman, he wants the woman to be more about him too. And that's very egocentric. Okay, that's like Tom Cruise right there, okay, who has a Venus-Moon conjunction, if I remember correctly. So that's not a good thing. You don't want moon influencing Venus, unless Venus is a lot stronger, like it was in this person's chart so far. But now in the fourth Varga, all of a sudden the moon is stronger and starving Venus. Venus doesn't get any help from his friends. So in the Chaturtamsha, we have a starved Venus. So the area where this person gets, where things become more about him and less about his woman and his partnership, is when he starts dreaming about it, imagining what he deserves in life, imagining his fortune. And so he comes up with these schemes that don't really, take into account the relationship sometimes. That, things that he thinks he's going to be lucky and are fortunate in, that don't take into account the relationship. And that's the one point where he sort of separates himself more from the relationship, okay? And where his wife just kind of rolls her eyes, okay? But in the other Vargas, he really focuses on the relationship, which means for a man, focuses on his woman, and they feel really happy, because in the other ones, the moon is not strong enough to starve Venus, because Venus is really strong, which means he really pays attention to his wife, okay? Now in the Saptamsha, we have a similar problem. Now we've got the moon is really strong. Venus is in a natural neutral, so it's at 50%. But it's roughly equal because the moon is towards the end of its sign, so it's only half as strong as it looks. Venus is in the middle, so it's really much weaker. Venus is in the middle sign, so it's like average strength. So these sort of average out and don't really create a problem. The area that the problem is in the fourth Varga. Okay? Alright, so again, we can isolate, when you start looking at all the Vargas, you can see, okay, where does this person have more difficulties with their spouse? Where are they more self-absorbed and not emphasizing the partnership? It's in the area of Chaturtamsha, fortune, and property and real estate. Okay? In the Dwadasamsha, we see a similar problem. We see the moon being strong, Venus being okay in a friend sign. And again, moon is strong, aspecting Venus to, what was it? Venus aspected by moon by 59 points, almost a full aspect. Really a strong influence. So here we have the relationship and the woman getting smashed by the moon. Okay? So this is the kind of person that, from an ancestral point of view, his family becomes more important to him. And, when it comes to dealing with his family, his ideas will dominate the partnership ideas. And that moon is also one of the planets that contributed to his nature to sort of, when it came to his parents, which is the Dwadasamsha, of not emphasizing the relationship, unfortunately, in some respects. It all worked out in the end because there's some good and bad planets. That's how life always is. There's some good and bad things. But in the Dwadasamsha, Venus gets starved. So in the context of his family, the moon, which is always him, the egocentric individual, is the moon. When it comes to the context of family stuff, then this person will, live less for the relationship and live more for what he thinks he needs to do. So back in Mercury moon period, whenever the moon period runs, there's some family things that come up that he thinks are more important than the relationship things in his life. And Venus gets starved. His wife gets starved during that time because of the family things he has to do, that he thinks he needs to do. And so in Mercury moon period, there are some family things that his wife just thought wasn't any of their business, that he felt he had to go deal with. And as a result, he was very absorbed in this thing that he really couldn't do anything about, and making his marriage life sort of miserable during that time. Okay, because he didn't live enough for the partnership, he lived too much for himself, which is what the moon's prone to do when it influences Venus. But overall, in most charts, Venus is stronger than the moon, and so or as strong, and so the moon can't kill Venus, luckily. It's a real problem when you see a moon really dominate Venus and really starve Venus. It'll cause huge problems in a relationship, especially in a man's chart, okay, but really in any relationship. And remember, there's that yoga, Venus and the moon are across the 1st and 7th house axis. You'll, not get married or have more than one marriages. It trashes your marriage life. And that's because of the Lagitati Avashtas of the moon starving Venus in that case. If it happens across the 1st, 7th house axis, it's so much more relationship centered than if it happens somewhere else. Okay. So anyway, so you see, whenever we look at any issue, the point I'm trying to make is let's look at all the 12 Vargas and see what's going on. Okay. And just really to see how that planet is. Like, let's look at Mars for this person. Just look at siblings. Okay, Mars is the Karaka of siblings. And the 3rd is the Karaka of siblings. Or the 3rd house is the sibling house. Mars in the Rashi chart's in a great friend sign. It's great. It's Rashi aspecting the 3rd bhava of siblings. Or, excuse me, it's aspecting the 3rd bhava of siblings to 54 points. So it's a great influence onto the 3rd bhava. We got a strong Mars influence on the 3rd bhava. That creates a lot of fate with siblings. It's good fate in the Rashi chart because Mars is in good dignity. In Drekana, Mars is in its own Rashi. So now it's really great fate. So this person has a lot of happiness with their siblings. They love their siblings, especially their younger sister, which is the 3rd bhava. Okay? They also love their younger brother. They really have a great relationship with their siblings in general. Now, the other important sibling house was the Dwadasamsha, because remember, 1 plus 2 is 3, so the 3rd bhava is a critical house. Now here, Mars goes into a neutral sign. Okay? So Mars does not help in the context of the parental relationships. The siblings don't get better from that, which means the parents in dealing with the siblings didn't really make any effort to improve the siblings' relationships, but they didn't really hurt it either. Okay, it was very neutral. But it's a tight-knit family in many ways, as you'd expect from, a good moon in the Dwadasamsha and these other good dignified planets. Pretty much everything's in good dignity in the Dwadasamsha, except there's some neutral planets. Well, Mars is one of the areas where there's more neutrality, okay? And that's in the context of siblings. The parents didn't make extra emphasis for the siblings to get along. You know how some parents try to think of things to do with the kids so the kids can really enjoy themselves? And then other parents might try to get the siblings to compete with each other, so they're always at war and they end up hating each other. Well, these parents really didn't do either of that. They just kind of let things take their natural way. And luckily, this person had really good fate with their siblings, shown by this great Mars in the Drekana and the good Mars in the Rashi chart. The other important place to look at Mars is the Navamsha as well, or the 3rd bhava is in the Navamsha. Here we see that Mars is not doing great. He's in a neutral sign again, so he's not helping that 3rd bhava. If it was helping the 3rd bhava, this person would be better able to, manifest mutual goals with his spouse. He'd be more focused along his path, more capable of working hard and disciplined in his path. Mars is the planet of discipline. In the Navamsha, the third house is the effort you make on the path. That's the effort you make in your marriage. That's the path you choose, whatever. Mars is really not helping him have more discipline in that. Okay? The other planets influencing the third bhava, Mars is the strongest and it's neutral. Okay, Mercury aspects, and it's the, where's that third cusp in the Navamsha? Mercury's aspect in the third cusp, Mercury's in a neutral sign, so he's not helping, but he's not hurting. Saturn's the one planet that could really hurt that and really ruin his path. Luckily, Saturn doesn't ruin the effort he makes on the path, but Saturn is not aspecting, I don't think, the third bhava. Oh, it is, just a teensy bit, 5 points. It somehow manages just to touch that bhava to 5 points. So Saturn is hurting it a little bit, which is perseverance. So a lack of perseverance at times will hurt the effort along his chosen path, but only a little bit. The only planet that's going to really be able to help the third is its Lord, and unfortunately its Lord's debilitated, so he can't help it, but he's not hurting it. So it's really a neutral third bhava. Okay, a totally neutral third bhava, kind of funny. Saturn is, we're just going to look at the Lord now then, because the third bhava in the Navamsha is an important bhava, because again it shows the effort you make along the chosen path. So far it's all dead. It's just totally flat. It's not ruinous effort, but it's not successful effort either. So now we have to also focus on the Lord. Mars, which is the karaka for that, we've seen is sleeping. Okay, Mars is the Lord of Saturn, and so even though Saturn's in a natural enemy sign, since Mars is sleeping, he can't hurt Saturn. So that's good for Saturn. Saturn's influenced by his enemy sun. Sun's in a neutral sign, so he's starving him. Moon is just influencing him a little bit, pretty negligible. But Mercury and Venus are helping Saturn a lot. And they're both in decent dignities. They're both in a natural friend sign. So these two planets, Mercury to 36 and Venus to 45 points, are going to help out Saturn more than the Sun is going to hurt Saturn. So Mercury and Venus help this person have more productive effort with respect to their path that they choose, which for them is marriage, which is good because you need a good third house, because the path you're on will take effort, and that effort has to be productive overall. With this person, they just skim by with helping it become productive thanks to those good influences. And that's why they were able to make it through Saturn Dasha married. They got married under Saturn period, and they made it through Saturn period. Even though Saturn doesn't look very good, does it? You look, oh, how'd they get debilitated in the Dasha? How'd they get married in the Dasha of a planet debilitated in the Navamsha? The reason is because Saturn's rules the karaka Venus. And Saturn is delighted by Mercury. Okay? So Saturn actually, and it's delighted by Venus. And it's not starved by anyone but the Sun. So Saturn actually ends up being a pretty good planet. Wasn't done without sacrifice, which was the Sun. Okay? But it was still done. Okay? Which is good. So this is a way you can read the chart when you're just using all Vargas, when you're jumping around. And usually the person will look at the Rashi chart, and they'll jump around the Rashi chart, and they'll start with the 7th, and then they'll naturally move to Venus, and then they'll naturally move to the Lord of Venus, whatever. And we naturally sort of move through the chart. And that's how we need to do astrology when you read a chart for a person. This chart I did today, I haven't looked at this chart in like 2 years. I knew a person's history a lot, so I just pulled it up. I said, I'm going to use this today. And I didn't look at it beforehand. I just started with the most obvious bhava to see where it kind of took me to the next most interesting thing. And that's what you want to do when you read a chart with the person in front of you. You don't want to try to prepare and look everything over and figure it all out, because you'll get so overwhelmed with stuff and contradictions that you don't want what to say when you meet that person. What you want to do is you just want to know your principles. You want to know the important planets and all the important planets in each Varga. You want to know the important bhavas in each Varga. You want to know what each Varga represents. You want to know what planets represent, and you want to know what bhavas represent. And then you just kind of skip around to where the next natural place to look is. And if you learn that, if you learn all those little simple basic things, and then you let yourself skip around, your intuition will take you to the next part of the chart that you need to talk about. So you'll start at the 7th house, and then your intuition will say, look to the Saptamsha and Chaturtamsha. But look at the Chaturtamsha first for this person. So you do, and you see Mercury is really strong, and you make a good prediction as a result. Or if you looked at the Saptamsha first, maybe you wouldn't have made that great prediction, because your first thought would have been Mercury's not great in the Saptamsha. So you just want to you want to know your techniques and know your principles blindfolded. And then you want to dance through the Vargas the same way you dance through the Rashi chart. There's no need to cover everything. You just have to dance through it and hit the right things that you need to for that consultation. And the only way to do that is to let yourself be flexible, to not over-prepare for the chart. In fact, don't even prepare for the chart. But know your information, know your techniques, and have used your techniques on lots of charts that you tried the techniques on. And then give yourself over to those techniques and jump through the Varga charts as appropriate, and use all 12 of them to see the full story. The same way you use 12 bhavas and the houses, and when you look at the Rashi chart and you're jumping around to different bhavas, now start jumping through the Varga charts as well. And it's not hard to do. You just have to understand your basics. If you find it hard, go back to your basics. Look at each Varga independently, as I did in the examples throughout the Varga course. Look at each Varga independently. Try a prediction and just get comfortable until you really know those techniques. And then you'll just start jumping through all the Vargas as appropriate once you know what everything means. So you just have to know all that stuff, and then you just opened up 7 more dimensions of looking at the person's life, which means you can look at their life now 7 times more accurately than when you just looked at the Rashi chart alone, or 4 times more accurately and 4 more dimensions than if you looked at just the Rashi chart and 1 Varga. Like if you only looked at the Rashi and the Saptamsha, you would have said, well, geez, your relationship doesn't look that productive because, sure, Mercury's good in the Rashi, but in the Saptamsha it's not. And then you're missing this Mercury and Gemini in the Chaturtamsha, and you would lose a lot of the fortune that they gained from Mercury boosting that 7th house. Okay? So dance through the charts. You can use aspects to bhavas too, but conjunctions are more important, so start there and then dance into aspects of other bhavas if you need to, or as you need to, because you will need to, just as you need to do that. So learn each independent Varga as we did, and then start jumping around and having fun and really open up the chart of these first 12 Vargas. Now, the next set of Vargas is the Vargas from 13 to 24, and that's Vargas 16, 20, and 24. Those are the interior Vargas, the Vargas of happiness, of devotion, and understanding, respectively. So all this is what we talked about, is what's happening sort of outside. But how's the person really doing inside? Are they really understanding things? Or are they just ignorant? Are they really devoted to trying to make this work, or do they just really not care? Are they really finding real happiness in this, or is it just superficial happiness? Because the 16th Varga is real happiness. Okay? So let's just pop this person's as a sort of a preview. Their Venus is debilitated in the Shodamsha chart. Okay? So this is the external happiness, what we can call the superficial happiness, or the portrayed happiness, or the The happiness you sort of show. It's looking great. He's so happy with his spouse. Look at it here. Look at it here. We see this good Venus all in all. But then we go to Shodamsha and we see Venus is debilitated. Okay? Venus luckily it's debilitated in a friend sign. So Mercury can give some happiness to Venus. And it does. But then the moon we've seen, because Mercury does because in a natural neutral sign. So Venus gets some delight from Mercury. The only other planet that's influencing Venus significantly we've seen is Moon. The Moon's in a friend sign. It's a strong moon that's going to starve Venus as much as Mercury is going to help Venus. So we've got a real flat Venus in this Shodamsha. So the truth is they're really not as happy as their life shows, really inside, internally now. They're really not as happy with being married as they like to say and like to act, as the external life shows of Vargas 1 through 12. Vargas 1 through 12 are all external manifestations of our fate. The Dwadasamsha is the external manifestations of our ancestral fate. And sure, that has emotional and that has, happiness connotations to it. But the bottom line is, are you really happy or not? Really on a deep inner level, a level of true happiness. It's the 16th Varga. How is true happiness different than superficial happiness? Well, you're happy because you got a great wife. That's superficial happiness. Okay? Shodamsha is you're happy because you're really capable of being happy with a great wife. Because you can be a great wife and know it's a good reason to be happy, but still not really be capable of the happiness to have a great wife. And that's what this person has. Venus is great. All in all, he has a great wife, all in all. But he's not really able to be happy with a great wife because his Venus is starved in the Shodamsha. So he doesn't have that level of happiness that he can truly appreciate the best of woman. And he has a great woman, but he can't truly find the happiness there that another person could find with that woman if their Venus was exalted in the Shodamsha. So again, the next three Vargas are all the inner, the true inner life that really determines how happy we are, how understanding we are, and how much joy we have in life. Everything else is just sort of superficial happiness. And we predict all those other things. And people always ask, well, when am I going to get married? And as an astrologer, you think, if I can predict them having a good marriage, that means I'm going to tell them when they're going to be happy. So then you look and you see in the Navamsha that Venus is the ninth lord and it's exalted, and Venus Dasha starts next week. And you're going to say, you're going to marry someone you're happy with next week. They're going to meet the wonderful person next week, just an amazing woman. They're going to marry her. And then if Venus is debilitated in the 16th Varga, they're not going to be happy with her. Okay? Or if it's starved in the 16th, they're still not going to be happy. So you told them when they were going to meet an amazing woman and marry her. Your prediction was right. But where your prediction could have been wrong is the level of happiness they have with being married to that wonderful, amazing woman. Okay? So are we predicting a great event, or are we really predicting happiness? They're two completely different things. If we want to predict happiness in those types of things, we have to look at the 16th, 20th, and 24th Vargas. Each of those in itself gives a different type of true fulfillment. All these other Vargas just give superficial fulfillment. Yeah, I have the dream, but I'm miserable because my 16th, 20th, and 24th Vargas suck. Or the other way around. I don't have anything. Everything I do doesn't work. Why am I feeling so great, really, when it comes down to it? Because you got a wonderful 16th, 20th, and 24th Vargas. So eventually you'll want to dance through those Vargas too as we cover them, which we'll do before too long. Okay? I'm stopping this first Vargas course after the first 12 Vargas, Vargas 1 through 12, because they're a block within themselves. We're always going to use those Vargas. no matter what other Vargas we look at, because we're going to just expand to adding more and more and more Vargas. Okay? But I finished the first set of 12 as a full course right now because when we start on the next Vargas, we're going to do it all mathematically. It's not how sometimes I'll say, but even though the moon is starting Venus in the Septumtia, because the moon's at the end of the sign and Venus is in the middle, the moon can't hurt Venus as much as we think because he's at the end of the sign where he loses a lot of strength. Well, we're going to learn first, before we look at further Vargas, how to calculate all that stuff out so that we can really use some highly refined math to see, okay, this is exactly how much the moon is hurting Venus. And this Venus ends up being hurt exactly as much as it can handle, or just 3 more points to where it actually starts suffering, or not enough to make it really suffer. We're going to work all that stuff mathematically, which will make it a faster process to go and look through the Vargas, because we won't have to juggle as many factors, and it'll make a more accurate process. The reason I didn't teach the mathematical stuff with the bhavas and the Lajitati Avashtas right away was because it's important that you understand what you're doing with Lajitati Avashtas. I didn't want you guys looking at a table and picking a number off the table and not knowing what it meant, because it's so important that you know what that number means. Before we get into those courses of showing those Lajitati Avashtas with mathematics, we're going to learn how to just simply interpret the Lajitati Avashtas more. Like, what does it mean when moon stars Venus? We covered a lot of that today. We're going to have classes on all of those. So you can talk to the client. You can say, well, the reason this isn't happening is because Venus is starred by the moon, which means that you are doing this, which means if you want your love life to work, you have to start doing this instead. So you need to know those interpretations to actually give useful information to your clients. So we're going to do that in the next Lajitati Avashtas course, which is the next class I'm starting. Then we'll do the mathematical courses, and then we'll get back to Vargas. So it'll be a while before we get back to Vargas, which is fine because you got 8 Vargas to really work with. You got a world of information. And based on what I talked about at the beginning of the Varga course, where I talked about the basic meanings of all the Vargas, anyone can run into those Vargas if you want to. You know the information to run into those Vargas and really start using them to a high capacity if you want to. You don't know the deities for those Vargas and so on, but that's okay. You can learn those later when I teach them. So jump into those Vargas if you feel ready, but if not, you can do so much with these first 8 Vargas 1 through 12. And so now we're going to kind of let that settle, work with those things before taking on more Vargas stuff, find out what you can see with those first 8 Vargas, and then down the road a while we'll cover the other 8 Vargas after we learn some more techniques to use on those Vargas. And then of course we'll use those techniques on the first 12 as well as the rest of the Vargas. So we'll use them on all the Vargas when we get into those courses and when we get into the other Vargas course. Okay? And at that point, once we get done with those things, at that point we'll have really covered everything that's Parashara astrology. It'll all have been covered. All the true Parashara astrology will have been covered. Well, except Shayanadi Avashtas and Diptadi Avashtas, which we'll get into, but those will be really quick, brief classes comparatively. Okay? But the judging bhavas and the Lajitati Avashtas are the things you're going to use the most when you're actually making concrete predictions and also seeing the virtues and the difficult ways that a person's using a planet that are either help or hinder them. Okay, so enjoy this course and really try to learn to use all this stuff we covered, because this is the stuff we're going to build on. And in some ways it's going to get easier when we get the mathematical calculations out, but you still need to understand what's happening so you can talk to the client beyond just saying a prediction. By knowing what's happening, you can add details. You can say, oh, you're losing money from a friend, or you're losing money from your spouse, or you're losing money from vehicles, you know, to tell them where they're going to suffer financially. Instead of just saying, oh, your money's going to suck for the next 2 years, you could say your money's going to suck because you give a lot of money to a friend and they can't repay you. You know, so you got to learn, you have to understand how everything works to make those type of predictions. And that's why I started with the techniques, doing them manually without just having all the math there, to make it in some ways faster and easier. But you could do it without knowing what you're doing, which is never a good idea to do anything in astrology that you really don't know what you're doing. So we're doing it this way so you actually know what you're doing. You're looking at the friends and enemies and considering each of those influences and so on. Okay, thank you. Enjoy studying these Vargas until we get back to them. Bye-bye.